Forget everything you think you know about House of Wax, because over the next few minutes, I am going to prove to you that this movie was never about two sadistic killers hunting teenagers on a lost highway. Ambrose is not a ghost town. Ambrose is the X-ray of a diseased mind projected onto the physical world. Every street, every building, every wax-covered body in that place is a symptom. And the wax? Pay close attention to this, because this is the key to everything. The wax is not a weapon. The wax is a gag tied around the mouth of time itself. Bo and Vincent Sinclair are not killing people for pleasure. They are trying to stop reality from moving forward, trying to freeze the world at the exact second before their mother died. And if you stay with me until the end, you will never be able to watch this film the same way again. Because tonight, when the lights go out and you close your eyes, you're going to ask yourself how much of your own life is also coated in wax. How much of your past you keep intact, motionless, breathing quietly in the dark, just so you never have to admit that it is over. Come with me, because we are going down into the basement of this madness together. House of Wax, released in 2005, was sold to the world as a generic slasher. Pretty young people, an isolated town, two psychopaths, blood, chases, screaming. The formula Hollywood has been recycling since the 80s. And the critics swallowed the packaging whole. The film was torn apart, ridiculed, treated as disposable product. But nobody, absolutely nobody, stopped to read what was written between the lines of that script. Because hidden underneath the wax is one of the most brutal studies of pathological grief and shared psychosis that horror cinema has ever produced. Maybe by accident. Maybe the script itself never understood the clinical monster it was creating. But it is there, and it begins long before the first murder. It begins in 1974, in a filthy kitchen, with two little boys and a roll of tape. Trudy Sinclair, the mother, was a sculptor. The father was a surgeon. And together they had conjoined twins. Bo and Vincent were born fused at the face, at the skull, sharing skin, tissue, blood, sharing, quite literally, the border between one body and the other. And the father performed the separation at home. Sit with the weight of that for a second. The very first life experience these two human beings ever had was a mutual amputation. Before they learned to speak, before they formed any concept of identity, they were cut away from each other. And developmental psychology has a name for what happens when your first record of the world is pain and rupture. Preverbal trauma. A trauma that occurs before language exists cannot be stored as memory. It never becomes a story, never becomes a narrative. It becomes structure. It becomes the foundation. The entire personality is built on top of. Bo and Vincent do not remember the separation. They are the separation. Each one carries the other's scar in his own flesh. Vincent was left with a ruined face, a wax mask covering the half that was torn away from him. And Bo was left with the invisible guilt of being the twin who walked away whole. And this is where the tragedy starts taking shape. Because the opening scene of the film, the one everybody dismisses as a stylish little prologue, is actually the entire diagnosis of the movie handed to you on a plate. The mother straps little Bo into a chair with packing tape because he thrashes, because he screams, because he claws at her. She immobilizes her own son. She turns her child into a living statue in order to control him. Burn that image into your mind. A conscious, furious child, strapped down, unable to move, while the world around him decides his fate. Because everything, absolutely everything Bo and Vincent do in Ambrose 30 years later is the compulsive reenactment of that scene. Freud called it repetition compulsion. The traumatized mind cannot move past the thing that broke it. So it repeats, and repeats, and repeats, except with the roles reversed. The child who is strapped down becomes the adult who straps others down. The child who is turned into an object becomes the adult who turns people into objects. Wade taped into that metal chair, while hot wax rains down on his skin, is not a random victim. He is little Bo, relived, restaged, made eternal. The Sinclair brothers are not punishing the visitors of Ambrose. They are performing, for an audience of statues, the only story their minds know how to tell. The story of being immobilized by someone who claimed to love you. And now I need you to understand the concept that holds this entire analysis together. Folie à deux, the madness of two. Modern psychiatry calls it shared psychotic disorder, or induced delusional disorder, and it describes one of the most disturbing phenomena in clinical literature. When two people who are extremely close, isolated from the world, bound by profound dependency, begin to share the exact same delusion. This is not a metaphor. It is literal. One mind gets sick first, builds a false reality, and the second mind, unable to exist without the first, adopts that reality as absolute truth. The documented cases almost always involve siblings, twins, mothers and children, isolated couples. People whose individual identity was already fragile before the break. And tell me, is there any pair on this planet with a more fragile individual identity than two twins who were born physically fused into one another? Bo and Vincent are the perfect case study, the laboratory specimen, because they never had the basic experience that defines a human being, the experience of being one. Vincent's first mirror was Bo's face pressed against his own. Bo's first sensation was Vincent's heartbeat knocking against his ribs. When their father's scalpel came down, it did not separate two boys. It created two halves condemned to spend their entire lives searching for the missing piece. And here is the inversion almost nobody catches. Physically, Bo was the dominant twin. Vincent was called the parasite, the appendage, the thing that got cut off, the one left deformed. The parents treated Vincent like a manufacturing defect that needed to be hidden from the world. But psychologically, inside the delusion, the hierarchy flipped completely. The one who rules Ambrose is not Bo. Watch the scenes again. The one who builds, who sculpts, who decides what the town is, who writes the rules of the false world is Vincent, the mute sculptor hiding behind a wax mask molded with his own mother's face. Sit with the symbolic horror of that. Vincent literally wears his dead mother over the wound of the separation. The hole his brother left in his face is plugged with Trudy's face. The mother becomes the skin that covers the trauma. And Vincent does not sculpt just anything. He sculpts the perfect world his mother wanted. All of Ambrose is the wax museum Trudy dreamed of building. Every statue is an offering to a dead woman. Vincent is the priest of that cult. And Bo is the guard dog, the armed wing of the delusion, the verbal brother, seductive, functional, the one who can talk to tourists, smile, lie, lure. Bo is the interface between the delusion and the real world. He brings in the raw material, he brings in the bodies, and whenever a visitor threatens to puncture the bubble, whenever somebody screams too loudly that all of it is a lie, Bo is the one who silences them. In the clinical literature on folie à deux, there is the inducer, the one who creates the delusion, and the induced, the one who accepts it. And the film plays a trick on our expectations. We spend the whole story assuming Bo is the psychopath and Vincent is the tool, until the scene where Bo dies. And Vincent does not stop. Vincent does not wake up. Vincent does not walk free. He keeps going, because the delusion was never Bo's. Bo was only the soldier. The architect was always the silent brother in the basement. And there is a third character inside this psychosis that almost everyone forgets. Lester, the youngest brother, the one collecting roadkill off the highway. The film strongly implies that he knows. He knows what happens in Ambrose. He delivers visitors the way you deliver firewood to a bonfire. He does not participate, does not kill, does not sculpt. He only feeds it. Psychiatry calls it folie à trois when a delusion infects a third person. But Lester is something even more disturbing than that. He is the complicit witness, living proof that a madness, if it lasts long enough, becomes routine, becomes scenery, becomes the normal of the house. And now take a deep breath, because we need to talk about the town itself. Ambrose does not exist. And I am not just talking about the plot, the fact that the town was abandoned and wiped off the maps. I am telling you that Ambrose, as the brothers maintain it, is a delusion with a zip code, the physical materialization of a psychotic mind. Walk these streets with me. The movie theater plays the same old film on a loop for an audience of waxed corpses who never applaud and never leave. The church is holding an eternal funeral, an open casket that never closes, a grief that never ends because it is never buried. The family house has the table set, the bedrooms made, the mother's dresses still hanging in the closet, the gas station, the diner, the general store, all frozen in the same year, all frozen in the year. Trudy Sinclair died. Do you understand what that means? When the mother died, the twins' clock died with her. And because two fused, shattered minds could not survive the passage of time without her, they did the only thing a psychosis knows how to do. They denied reality and built another one on top of it. Psychoanalysis has a precise name for this: the denial of loss, pathological grief. Healthy mourning is a process of detachment. Slowly, painfully, the mind accepts that the loved object is gone, withdraws its emotional investment, and returns to life. Pathological grief is the opposite. It is refusal. The mind clings to the dead with such force that it would rather destroy its own perception of reality than admit the absence. And the Sinclairs went further than any documented case. They did not deny their mother's death merely inside their heads. They sculpted the denial. They gave it streets, walls, faces. Ambrose is pathological grief turned into architecture. And inside that architecture, there is a technique that gives the whole game away: taxidermy. The film shows us that Lester lives among carcasses, that this family has an intimacy with dead things. And taxidermy is the art of making death look like life. You hollow out everything that rots, everything organic, everything fragile, and you preserve the shell, the skin, the pose, the glass eyes. A taxidermied animal is not alive, but it is also not allowed to be dead. It hangs suspended in a third state. And that is exactly what the Sinclairs do to people. Except with a refinement of cruelty no taxidermist has ever committed. Because the taxidermist works with what has already died. The twins do not. The twins work with the living. And it is here, at this exact point, that House of Wax stops being a horror movie and becomes a document about the worst fate a human being can suffer. Let's talk about Wade, the most famous scene in the film. Wade wakes up in a metal chair, paralyzed, not tied down, paralyzed. His body has been chemically switched off, and then the hot wax begins to fall, layer by layer, covering his arms, his chest, his neck, his face, and the camera makes a point of showing you the eyes. His eyes are moving because Wade is awake. Wade feels everything. And later, when Nick finds him turned into a statue and tries to peel the wax away, the skin comes off with it, and a single tear rolls down that hardened face. Wade was still in there, conscious, feeling his own skin tear like paper, unable to scream, unable to beg, unable even to die. Medicine knows this state, and truly understanding it will cost you sleep. Locked-in syndrome, a real, documented condition in which a specific lesion in the brainstem shuts down every motor command in the body. You cannot move a finger, cannot turn your head, cannot speak, cannot swallow, but the cortex, the part that thinks, feels, remembers, fears, remains perfectly intact. The person becomes a consciousness sealed inside a body that has become a coffin. Doctors have described patients who spent years like this, listening to their families discuss pulling the plug, listening to nurses talk about them like furniture, screaming on the inside while not a single muscle obeyed. There is an entire book, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, dictated by a man in that state, blinking one eyelid, letter by letter. Humanity knows this hell exists. And the film takes that clinical hell and turns it into a murder method, because the victims of Ambrose do not die. That is the sixth secret the script whispers and nobody hears. They are maintained, the body immobilized, the consciousness switched on, the eyes watching the world go by from behind a shell of wax, going insane in absolute silence, millimeter by millimeter, inside their own statue. Death would have been mercy. Death is an ending. What the Sinclairs offer is worse than any ending. It is eternity as a prop. It is becoming furniture in the mental theater of two madmen. It is watching, with eyelids that no longer obey, the endless play that two shattered minds perform for a dead mother. So right now, if the idea of being trapped inside your own body makes your throat close up, do not lose your grip on your reality. Anchor your sanity by hitting that like button, subscribe to Fractured Plot, and tell me in the comments if you could survive being frozen and fully conscious while someone else writes your fate. Because the statues of Ambrose never got a choice. You still do. And now that you understand what the wax really is, look back at every death in this film. Because none of them is random. Every murder is a ritual with a function inside the delusion. Carly is not simply captured. Bo glues her mouth shut. Notice the signature. He does not gag her with cloth. He glues her. He seals her. He does to her what the wax does to everyone. Interrupts the voice. Interrupts the protest. Interrupts the ability to say no. Exactly the way the packing tape interrupted his own screams in that kitchen chair. And then he clips off her fingertip. The finger, the most basic instrument of human autonomy. The thing that points, that reaches, that touches. Bo does not torture out of sadism. Bo dismantles, piece by piece, a person's capacity to act upon the world, because that is what was done to him, and Paige. Paige dies in the wax workshop, hunted between molds and hanging limbs, a young woman at the peak of vitality, and the film goes out of its way to show she suspects she is pregnant, potential life. And she is precisely the one the delusion needs to erase most violently. Because nothing threatens a frozen world more than someone carrying the future inside her body. Time is the only real enemy the Sinclairs have. And a pregnancy is time in its purest form. Every victim in Ambrose is chosen and positioned like a gear in a clock that was broken on purpose. The eternal hunter in his booth, the eternal family in the living room, the eternal congregation at the funeral in the church. Nobody ages. Nobody leaves. Nobody abandons. That is the word, abandonment. Everything in Ambrose is a fortress built against abandonment. The mother abandoned them by dying. The world abandoned them when the new interstate diverted the traffic and killed the town. Even the body abandoned them when the scalpel divided what was born as one. So the twins created a place that is physically impossible to leave. A town where every single resident is literally glued in place. Psychosis as glue. The fear of loneliness carried to its most monstrous conclusion. If everyone I love leaves me, then I will manufacture people who cannot leave. And attachment science explains why this hits these two so catastrophically. The psychoanalyst John Bowlby demonstrated that a baby's first attachment relationship becomes the template for every relationship that follows. And what was the twins' template? A mother who loved through immobilization, who expressed care by strapping down, restraining, silencing. For Bo and Vincent, love and paralysis were served on the same plate from day one. So when they pour wax over a human being, inside their emotional grammar, that is not merely violence. That is affection. It is the only form of affection they were ever taught. They are caring for their victims the way they were cared for, loving the way they were loved. And that might be the most terrifying sentence I say in this entire video. And there is one scene buried in the middle of the film that confirms this entire reading in the most chilling way possible. The movie theater of Ambrose, the film playing on an endless loop for that audience of wax, is whatever happened to baby Jane. And that is not a random choice. That is a confession. Because baby Jane is precisely the story of two sisters, trapped in a house, trapped in each other, trapped in a glorious past that no longer exists. one caring for the other in a sick tangle of love, hatred, and absolute dependency. The Sinclairs chose, as the eternal soundtrack of their delusion, a mirror. They sat their dead audience in front of their own story and pressed repeat for all eternity. The psychotic mind does this. It leaves clues. It tells the truth in code, in symbols, in choices that look decorative, because some buried part of it still knows what happened and needs to tell someone, even if no one in the audience can ever stand up to answer. And notice Vincent's hands. The film insists on his hands, delicate, precise, the hands of a genuine artist. The sculptures of Ambrose are technically flawless, every wrinkle, every eyelash, every expression, which means that inside that basement lives a real talent, a real sensitivity that in another world, with another childhood, would have become art. And that is what makes all of this unbearable. Vincent is not an emptiness that destroys. He is a creator who was broken. The same hand that could have sculpted beauty for museums sculpts coffins with human faces. Trauma does not invent new capacities. It hijacks the ones that exist and aims every last one of them at the wound. And there is a detail in this film's mythology that makes everything even sicker. The House of Wax itself, the main building, the museum that gives the movie its name. It is not a brick building with statues inside. The entire house is made of wax. The walls are wax. The floors are wax. The staircases, the door frames, the doorknobs. Wax. Stop on that image with me for 2 seconds. The brothers live inside a material that melts. They built the shrine to their mother's memory out of the most unstable substance on earth. And that is not a plot hole. That is the most precise metaphor horror has ever produced about the nature of a delusion. Because every psychosis is exactly that. A structure that looks solid, that has corridors, rooms, internal logic, rules, but that is permanently one lit match away from collapse. The psychotic mind burns a colossal amount of energy, keeping the temperature of its world under control, avoiding the heat of reality, because somewhere, in some dark basement of itself, it knows the whole house is meltable. And the film delivers that truth in the climax. And this is where I need to change, forever, the way you see the ending. The House of Wax catching fire and melting is not an action sequence. It is a psychotic collapse filmed in real time. When Carly and Nick set that structure on fire, they are not destroying a building. They are doing what 30 years of reality could not do. They are puncturing the delusion, and look at how the film shows it. The walls run like liquid. The statues' faces slide off their skulls. The dead mother, present in every mold, in every wax face, melts for the second time. The twins watch their own mind pouring across the floor. Bo, the guard dog, the soldier of the delusion, dies, and notice the detail the film insists on showing you. Vincent holds his brother's body. Vincent weeps over Bo. The monstrous killer of this movie ends exactly the way he began. One twin clinging to the other, refusing to be separated. And when Vincent finally falls, he falls with the house. He sinks into the melted wax. He is swallowed by his own creation. The architect of the delusion devoured by the delusion. Psychiatry has described this phenomenon in patients with shared psychotic disorder. When the pair is separated, when the inducer dies or is committed, the induced partner sometimes wakes up. But in the deep cases, the cases where the delusion is the only identity structure the person has left, separation does not cure. Separation annihilates. Without Bo, Vincent is not a liberated man. He is half a person exposed to open air, and half a person does not survive the raw atmosphere of reality. That is why he does not run from the burning house. There is no him outside that house. The house was the mind. The mind melted. The end. Except it is not the end. Because now I have to destroy the last illusion you have left. The illusion that Carly and Nick escaped. They did not escape. Nobody escapes Ambrose. The film ends with the two of them in an ambulance at dawn, crusted in dried wax, staring at nothing, and everyone reads that scene as relief. They survived. They won. happy ending. That is a lie. Look at those two with clinical eyes. They went through a night of extreme, prolonged terror. They watched their friends get turned into objects. Carly touched Wade's face and felt the skin give way under her fingers. Nick shattered the wax face of a man who was still alive inside. They now carry images the human brain was never designed to process. And psychiatry knows exactly what happens to survivors like that. Severe post-traumatic stress disorder. And I want you to understand the mechanism, because it closes the circle of this story in a way that is almost poetic in its cruelty. In PTSD, the traumatic memory is not filed away like other memories. A normal memory ages, gains distance, becomes the past. A traumatic memory does not. It stays trapped in the present tense. The brain replays it in flashbacks with the full sensory intensity of the original moment. The smell, the sound, the panic, intact. Years later, decades later, the person does not remember. The person relives. And now put the pieces together with me. What is a memory that does not age, that does not change, that stays frozen, perfect, intact, immune to the passage of time? It is a taxidermied memory. It is a memory dipped in wax. Carly and Nick drove out of that town, but the town never drove out of them. The Sinclairs lost the physical war and won the mental one, because they managed to do to the survivors exactly what they did to their victims. They paralyzed a piece of their consciousness forever. Somewhere in a back room of Carly's mind, the wax is still warm. Wade is still crying that single tear under the shell. The basement still smells of chemicals, and no fire will ever burn that away. Hit that like button if this theory just shattered the way you watch this film. Lock in your subscription and turn on the notification bell right now, before you too end up as nothing but a prop in somebody else's madness. Because that is what this story is really about, underneath everything. The terrifying ease with which one mind can be captured by another mind's reality. Folie à deux is not some exotic disease locked away in psychiatry manuals. It is the pathological extreme of something that happens every single day, on a smaller scale, in ordinary houses. Relationships where one person defines what is real and the other simply agrees so they won't be alone. Entire families that silently agree not to see what is right in front of their eyes. Couples who build a version of their own story and melt down anyone who disagrees. The Sinclair's wax is grotesque, cinematic, exaggerated. But its function, to silence, to freeze, to keep the other person from moving, to keep the other person from leaving. That function exists in the real world, in invisible versions. And maybe you have already felt it on your own skin without ever knowing its name. So the next time you watch House of Wax, do not look at Bo and Vincent as monsters from another species. Look at them as the final result of deeply human things. The fear of abandonment, the inability to bury the people we love, the temptation to stop the clock. They simply got the wrong childhood, the wrong surgery, the wrong isolation, and the wrong material in their hands. Ambrose burned. The wax ran down the street and hardened again on the cold asphalt of the early morning. And that is how the film says goodbye, with the madness melted, but not destroyed, merely changing shape, waiting patiently for the next pair of broken minds to decide that reality hurts too much to be accepted. And that time is an enemy that can be defeated, with heat, with a mold, and with one thin, translucent, eternal layer of wax. I am the voice of Fractured Plot, and tonight's session ends here. But the museum never closes.